Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, of course, once again from the flight deck. And that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and this segment certainly no exception. An old friend of the show and an old friend probably, undoubtedly, of yours, at least of your sports interest, Mr. Tom Keegan. He is the sports director at the Lawrence Journal-World. He does much more than that, though. He is an author. A columnist, obviously. He has been on television, on The Drive. He's also on radio. He has a blog and all the other variety of things that he has. Undoubtedly has some very cool Facebook page and Twitter and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Tom, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, and thanks for plugging my Facebook page. Anyone who sees it knows that I post a lot of Neil Young music videos. That's been a constant in my life, is Neil Young. Since I had older brothers, I listened to him from the late 60s when he first came onto the scene, and here I am listening to him now. I've seen him in concert 5 consecutive decades, and I've been a guy who goes to a ton of concerts, but Neil Young, 5 consecutive decades.
Did you ever see him with Buffalo Springfield?
No, I didn't. I would have been too young then, but I do remember him from then.
I'm showing my age.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, Clancy's a great song of his they did with Buffalo Springfield, but the producer of the record thought his voice was too unusual, so he had one of the other guys in the band sing that song. And then when you hear Neil go off on his own and sing it, you realize that he's the one who should have been singing it from the beginning. It was about a friend of his who had MS in high school, and he has a really a strong emotional feel to the way he sings this song.
Well, we could probably talk about the various concerts that you and I have seen, the classic rock artists we've seen over the years, but I'm not sure the audience would really give much credence to any of that. But anyway, all right. Well, let's talk about Tom. Tom has been, gosh, how long have you been with the Journal-World?
10 years now.
Wow.
And but I first came on with you on radio 14 years ago.
Right. Tom was actually a guest of this show for those that you did not know, that do not remember, and shame of you for not remembering. Tom wrote a book about Eldon Ocker, what was one of the works that he did. Eldon Ocker, of course, a great baseball player from the state of Kansas, and Tom kept up a relationship with Eldon until his death, I believe. Is that not right, Tom?
That's correct, yeah, in 2006.
Yeah. Anyway, and then later, a few years after that interview, Tom winds up as the editor at the sports writer, and then ultimately editor at the Journal-World, and so we're glad to have him here. Tom, for a sports writer, I would think being in a town like Lawrence, with close proximity to Kansas City and with the high profile of high school football, basketball, college, and professional, this has got to be kind of a dream area of the country for you.
Well, it's a great place to cover sports, and for one thing, you only have to drive 8 minutes to cover it, which is something new to me, having worked in L.A. and Chicago and New York, where you're dealing with traffic and everything. Here, big-time sports is 8 minutes away. Big-time culture is 8 minutes away, no matter where you live in Lawrence. So it's kind of a hidden secret, and some people like to see it stay that way, and some people like to see it grow, but it works for me either way. It's a great place to live and certainly a great place to cover sports.
Well, it is the largest employer, and it is the certainly the largest in terms of sports attendance. But I know there's lots of sports stories that you have tremendous interest in beyond KU in this area.
Yeah, definitely. The high school programs, Free State and Lawrence, both are really interesting. They're competitive with each other and pretty competitive in the state. A lot of good athletes here, and I attribute that in part to athletes from KU falling in love with Lawrence and wanting to live here, and their athletic genes and their athletic knowledge is passed on to the next generation. And you'll see teams with offspring of former KU players. For instance, one of the best athletes in town right now is Chris Piper's daughter playing varsity basketball last year. She was a terrific varsity player as a freshman. So that's part of it, and part of it is the great coaching with the youth programs in town.
Tom, we've talked about this the last time you were on. It's been a while, but let's talk about, you're a good example. You're a baby boomer that got into sports writing. You also did some broadcasting, but how has the demands on today's sports writer, okay, sports reporter, how has it changed since the time you got into the business?
Well, because of the internet, you've got the 24/7 cycle, so as soon as you write something, it generally goes up right away, and then you're on to your next project. So you're writing a lot more often. That's one change, and then you try to augment that with podcasts, and we have a video show weekly on KUSports.com called KU Sports Extra, and we do podcasts almost daily, and also for beat writers, they see things on message boards that they have to check out. And, once in a while something ends up being true and you get it verified. And very often it's just a wild goose chase that just adds to the job.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about in particular. In the old days, a reporter would, well, I don't want to simplify it too much, but you had at least 24 hours or 12 to 24 hours to write a story, get quotes, do some verification, write it, submit it, etc. In this day and age, like you said, you see on message boards or on a variety of social media, a rumor, a thought, an accusation, etc. And at some point, you have to really take those seriously, do you not?
You do, and you call people that you trust, and you try to verify it or deny it, get them to deny it, or see where they are in between. But you don't report it if it's, there's nothing to it. You just don't report it if you can't get someone to say there's something to it. I'll give you an example. Every day since this search, there's been on a message board or on Twitter, and especially in emails, Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh wants this job. I know someone who ran into Jim Harbaugh's brother-in-law and says this is where he wants to go, and blah, blah, blah. And, there's just no verification for that, no validation. Does it mean Jim Harbaugh couldn't, out of the blue, come and get the job at the last minute? Sure, that's possible. Anything's possible. I mean, Shane Zenger could, at the last minute, decide he wants to hire Jerry Faust because Jerry Faust convinced them that because he's older than Bill Snyder, he's therefore wiser. I mean, anything can happen.
Tom, do you, I'm curious as to, therefore, because of this 24 cycle, and it's not just the internet, but it's also radio and television as well. When's the last time, for example, you saw a test pattern on a TV station? It's been a while. So it is around the clock. I'm curious as to, does that make athletes and coaches, quite frankly, the people that you interview and deal with quite regularly, are they more apprehensive about sharing things or less just because they know ultimately certain things will get out and they want at least to tell their side?
Well, maybe they're more apprehensive with friends or like that because it'll end up on a message board. So it probably makes them, they ought to, I'm sure they don't, but they ought to appreciate that the media vets things before just throwing it on a message board or something. And maybe they do appreciate that, but
what about let's go back to, again, let's talk about the role, your original role as a sports reporter for a daily newspaper. Does that now, as a reporter, with instant messaging, with the instant communication, does that mean that the sports column now has to become something of substantially more depth, or how has that changed?
I think you always gun for depth. I think what I do is sometimes I'll try to put the best of the day as my column, and then maybe other things along the way I can put into blogs, and that maybe are more niche oriented, that might appeal to a more narrow audience, like really digging deep on KU football in a position area or something, where you may not put that as a column because it wouldn't reach as broad an audience. So you just make these decisions on the fly and just generate as much news as you can, or as much comment and as much analysis as you can. And some naturally fit better in the newspaper, and some naturally fit better online.
Again, we're with Tom Keegan of the Journal World. Tom, you started your career writing. lots of young reporters, not too much younger than you, of course, but younger reporters, never wrote for a daily, never had an editor, never really had a subscription base. They simply did internet kind of and the virtual communication. What do you think your newspaper background and that kind of school of hard knocks is? How has that changed you or made you maybe have a different perspective?
Well, I think it's good for you to have someone critiquing your work and making you back things up. Like, you don't have this verified. Do you have a quote on this, or is this just you saying it? Or that kind of stuff just makes you challenge your own work better, and also wordiness. You see, I remember my first assignment at Marquette was write an essay on something exciting in the summer. And then the whole purpose of it is the teacher pared it down to about half the size without taking out any significant content. It was just so wordy. And if you're wordy in today's world where everyone is so busy and you're not economical with your words, they're not going to get through your stuff. And also, if it's real wordy, they're not going to get your message because too many words got in the way. I always tell young writers, if any words don't add to what you're writing, they subtract. They're not neutral. If they're meaningless words, they are not neutral. They're subtracting because they're getting in the way of the significant words. And very often you can tell the difference between a trained writer and someone who's not because they have too many words. Now, some people are just natural writers and great communicators, whether trained or not, but that's pretty rare. So wordiness is a huge, huge key.
What about how? I know you being on the drive on television, and let's face it, you and I both know the camera adds about 300 or 400 pounds. We get that. We totally understand
exactly.
that.
I'm actually very stoked.
I agreed. We both understand that. What do you like about TV? What do you like about that format versus, and what are you maybe not quite as comfortable with?
You know, it's interesting. I'm totally comfortable on TV. Which, because of my appearance, you might not think so, but something about that light, when the light goes on, it's just a fun time for me. Whereas in radio, I wasn't as comfortable. And then there was a young guy who had played college sports at Marist, who was in great shape, who I worked with in radio. And on TV, he was sweating. He wasn't as comfortable, but he was really comfortable in radio. And I think that has to do with, if you're someone who likes to talk a lot, that you're suited for radio, and you can go on for hours and hours and hours, and you have natural rhythm. That you're comfortable on radio, and then on TV, the lights may make some people uncomfortable. It's weird. It's just the opposite of what you would have thought.
Well, okay. Again, Tom, from your perspective, and again, as of this conversation, the University of Kansas is continuing its search for a new head football coach. Let's dive into that subject. We would be remiss if we did not. From what you know, where do you see this headed? And again, you feel free to make a prediction on a coach if you wish. I'm really more interested, though, as the search goes on. What are you hearing? And are you about the quality of the candidates? And are they on target, at least with some kind of timeline?
Yeah, I think the timeline would be before December 12th. They've got some visits of recruits who come in then, so obviously they're going to want to be able to introduce him to the to the head coach. They want to introduce the recruits. So it'll be sometime, in this week. And where they're headed, I think, is where they started. Shane Zenger kind of went into this with the idea of, because of where this program is right now, it's going to require someone with a real familiarity with KU football, with the pros and the cons, with the areas that KU can recruit, with the areas where it's more difficult for them to recruit. All of that stuff they have to have a working knowledge of. And then you go through a bunch of other candidates some of whom withdraw, like Matt Wells of Utah State and Fuente of Memphis. And then at the end, you're back to basically where you started, which is former KU assistant coaches, or in the case of Clint Bowen, a current assistant coach, at the moment an interim head coach. And when you do that, you're back to the same basic names. And those names are David Beatty, Clint Bowen, Ed Warner, and Tim Beck. Tim Beck is the offensive coordinator at Nebraska. Of course, Bo Pelini just got fired. You've got Ed Warner is the assistant coach, co-offensive coordinator is his title, offensive line coach, but he doesn't call the plays. So he's in the mix. Then David Beatty, the Texas A&M recruiting coordinator, who was wide receivers coach at Kansas, he's in the mix. Of course, Warner was the offensive coordinator during the Todd Reesing years, the three most productive offensive years statistically in the passing game in KU history. And the interesting thing about, and then there's Clint Bowen, of course. Clint's a defensive background. The other three guys are an offensive background. And so it's down to those four would be fairly confident in saying that.
At this particular juncture, and again, as of this conversation, is there anyone in particular that would have a slight edge? And we'll say that edge is not only in the AD's mind, but maybe in those that help fund the program overall.
Yeah, and I think it's mainly the AD's mind because there's nobody who's just going to make some booster come forward and say, okay, I'm going to fund your entire stadium and name it after us, and in exchange for naming rights to the stadium and to the coach, I'll give you X amount of multi-million dollars. At least there's no one that I know. There may be someone popping out at the last minute who would do that, but I think it's going to be basically the AD's choice after discussions with people on his committee like Banks Ludman, the former linebackers head of the Williams Fund, John Hadel, the former All-American halfback and All-American quarterback who's with the Williams Fund, is a closer on big donations. So I think that Shane Zenger really wants to put a premium on recruiting, and that may give David Beatty the slightest edge in Shane Zenger's mind to be the next head coach, and because he's so well liked and respected by Texas high school coaches, and he is also well known in this area for the work he did at KU under two different head coaches, Mark Mangino and Turner Gill in Gill's second year.
Right. Make, if you would, at any length you wish, make the case for Clint Bowen and then make the case against it.
Well, I think the case for Clint Bowen is through the years, you get to know these assistants a little bit in terms of talking with them off the record about talent, and their head coaches are fine with that. They clear it with the head coach before, let's say I'm doing a story on something, and they could just help you. Clint Bowen's ability to evaluate talent, I've always been extremely impressed with. The way he breaks down a player, the way he projects his future ceiling, right on the money, as good as anyone I've talked to. And that's huge in this job, because the main thing is you got to know who to go after and who not to go after, because it's a developmental program. Another thing in Clint Bowen's favor, he's a guy who works super hard, but he's also a human being he'd be good to work with and work for. So I think in assembling a staff, that would help him assemble a quality staff. He knows how to reach this generation of athlete. He's a direct communicator, in your face with stuff, but he also can be a fun guy to be around. I think that works with today's athlete. The case against him, he's never been a head coach. That would be the main case against him, I guess. He just has never been a head coach. I think he'd do a good job here. I think he'd be a great fit. For the Kansas job, Maybe not for other jobs, because the advantage he has at Kansas, he knows exactly what type of player to go after at Kansas, and he's known in the recruiting areas and would know. He's gone up against other young recruiters, assistant coaches. He would know the difference between who's an assistant coach who's actually a good recruiter and who's just an assistant coach who has a good reputation as a recruiter, maybe partly because he's a good self-promoter.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, in the interest of time, unfortunately, we're going to have to move off as we close out on this particular one. Again, as of this conversation, do you have a gut feel of who that might be? Any idea?
Who the chain may pick?
Yeah. If they were going to name a coach this afternoon, who would it be, do you think?
Let's say the penalty is if I get it wrong, I get saddled with the flu, and if I get it right, I get the flu shot. I'll say David Beatty.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's move on quickly. Give us a quick prognostication about the KU basketball team. We've got a whole season laid out in front of us, but where we are as of mid-December.
Well, they're much better at point guard. Frank Mason, without Nadir Tharp maybe holding him back because he was a little deferential toward Tharp, is a big upgrade at point guard. Didn't know he was going to be this good this quick. Always liked him, though. And Cliff Alexander, if he can stay out of foul trouble, is going to be really, really good. So I like their chances. I think it's going to be real hard to win the Big 12 with Texas. So that's going to be a great race to watch. And, you know, if they face the right opponents in the tournament, they could go a long way. I don't see how they could beat Kentucky, but I would say that about just about anybody.
Yeah. What about the KU women's basketball team?
A little bit on the young side. So I think it'll be hard for them to get to the NCAA tournament.
All right, let's quickly, as we start to close out here, give us give us Tom Keegan's take on both prospects for Free State and Lawrence High, both the boys and girls teams, if you want to go that deep.
Well, the Free State girls, I think, can be really good because they were good last year and they got a lot of their talent back. And the Lawrence High boys, no reason they won't be really a top-tier team, and I think they probably were banded closer together. With what happened with Mike Lewis losing his job temporarily and then being reinstated. But, you know, they've got a really talented group of kids who play hard, and, you know, Justin Roberts and Bonner and others on the team. I like their chances a lot. With Price Morgan gives them some size, so they've got a chance to win a state title. That'll be an exciting team to watch.
Well, it's always fun to talk to this guy. Tom Keegan he's got his finger on the pulse of virtually everything athletic in this community for sure, and we'll watch with bated breath as KU makes its next head football coaching decision. Lots of sports headed our way to be reported by Tom. Tom, you got beyond the column and the blogs and the TV and the radio. What about you got a book or anything headed our way?
No, I'm too busy to do a book. Eventually I should just do a book on all the funniest things I witnessed in my career covering sports, because there's been a lot of funny things and a lot of funny quotes that people say, like when I asked Julian Wright who his hero was growing up in Chicago, and he said Michael Jordan. And I said, well, did you ever meet him? He said, yes, I played in the Jordan All-Star game, and he talked to all of us. We stood on the baseline, talked to us for about 15 minutes, and I said, what was his message? He said, well, I don't remember anything he said, but it was a very memorable speech.
Well, as we look back quickly as we wind down here, I want to tell you how much I enjoyed accepting your ice bucket challenge, and enjoyed watching you get dumped, and probably vice versa, I guess.
Yeah, and, you know, Evan Ice is such a great guy and friend to so many people in town that I think the local support for that you can trace to how fondly people think of Evan Ice, and I hope that the support, if you go online and find our bucket challenges, you can get sent all the way to Evan Ice's how to continue to donate, because what a wonderful guy and a wonderful Lawrence family.
Indeed. Tom Keegan, thank you so much for being a part of the show today, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Werner.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.